Oh, do we have a good Q&A for you today? Like I said last week and left off with last week, as you can see, I changed the color of my backdrop there and turned my glasses on so you get a little bit different to look at here today. But as I alluded to last week, we are going to drop some bombs on intra-workout nutrition, and I got a really cool study to point out. But we're going to wait till the end of this Q&A to talk about that because I'm just a little teased like that, all right? So make sure you drop your questions down below for next week's Q&As every Sunday coming at you. And let's get to the first question. Fly French asked me, vertical versus horizontal pulling for the lats. So, when I had Valentin Tambosi on my podcast, he talked about doing the hard stuff and how horizontal pulling is just a little bit harder than vertical pulling. And he thinks that most people get more out of horizontal pulling. And after implementing that into my own training and being a little bit more biased towards horizontal pulling, probably 3/5 to 3/4 of my program is more horizontal based, and maybe a fourth, obviously the rest of that percentage is vertical based. I do think I get more out of horizontal. I really do. And I think that you can do horizontal pulling in a way that is still pretty dang lat focused. Like if you do those low to high cable rows, which you're seeing on the screen me doing right now, if I still have B-roll of that at some point. But those low to high cable rows, I can really engage my lats on those. Or just single arm rowing, and I really drive my elbows down and back. I really feel like I get, a little bit of that lower lat at least. And even on like single arm dumbbell rows, if I really drive my lat, like I think about driving my lat down into my hip and kind of crunching my side a little bit. When I do that, man, I think that is a dang good lat exercise. And you're also getting, some middle back, some traps involved into that. So I do think that I, anyways, get more out of horizontal pulling. And my barbell rows. I love barbell rows so much. I used to hate them. I used to not feel them at all. But once I really started, working on getting a slight little pause at the top and really squeezing the crap out of my back, dude, I can do one set of barbell rows and get a lot out of it. Have a nice pump just from one set. So I think that you can perform your pulling movements a lot of different ways to make it more or less lat focused. And I almost think that that's kind of regardless of vertical and horizontal. I do. You could be doing a close grip pull down and you could still squeeze your upper back and kind of your mid traps when you're doing that exercise. And you can make it a little bit more upper back focused rather than lat focused, a little bit anyways. Now, I still think that it's a good idea to have a pullover variation and some vertical pulling, just because you get that nice stretch of the lats in that kind of that different plane. Because of course horizontal, you get that stretch in the kind of the horizontal plane, but when you get that over your head stretch, it really does help, I think, anyways. So I definitely still think you should have some vertical pulling if your goal is to develop your lats fully. But man, I seem to get a little bit more out of that horizontal pulling. Now, I don't want this to sound like you shouldn't do any vertical pulling at all, because I do think it's beneficial, and I do think that you can still get quite a bit out of it, but I would be, for me anyways, a little bit biased into doing a little bit more horizontal pulling in my program, at least, just the way that I perform my exercises. But that's the thing. You can perform your exercises in a lot of different ways to engage a lot of different portions of your muscle groups and stress different portions a little bit differently, I think anyways. So I would think about it more so, how can I perform this back exercise to target the portion of my back that I would like to target for this exercise a little bit more than just vertical or horizontal. Is kind of how I'd approach it. But in general, I tend to like horizontal a little bit better. All right, so I hope that helps out there. And Owen says, what are your thoughts on consistent sets across a mesocycle? So, as some of you may know, I am a proponent of accumulating volume in terms of sets across the mesocycle. I just think that makes most sense to overload via the variable that seems to be the leading variable for hypertrophy, which seems to be volume. And I think it makes sense to have volume increase with your recovery capabilities across the mesocycle. Like that just makes a lot of sense to me. But a lot of people get really good results with consistent sets across the mesocycle. And I don't program accumulating volume for everybody. And there's some people that like having consistent sets because they think that they can get a better idea of how they're progressing in terms of just getting stronger in the gym. Because when they have accumulating sets, it's a little bit more difficult for them to tell, okay, I'm kind of doing the same weight here, similar reps in reserve, but more sets. Like I'm not totally sure. And it's a little easier to track if you're just getting stronger, which is cool. And I think that just getting stronger and having a similar volume across the mesocycle is kind of time tested anecdotally and has literature behind it as well of showing gains in hypertrophy. So I definitely think that you can do that and that you can get nearly optimal results if you just stay with a consistent set number across your mesocycle, with the caveat that that set number is within your minimum effective volume that's going to produce growth in your maximum recoverable volume, and you hang out in there and you see really good results with that, then I think that's great. However, I do think that accumulating volume is going to have the slight edge. I do personally believe that, but it might not have the slight edge for everybody. Because if you enjoy just doing straight sets and just getting stronger over time, and I still think you should try to get stronger over time when you accumulate sets, but if your psyche is that of you just enjoy straight sets for whatever reason across the mesocycle better, that could lead to you training harder, focusing more on your training, and that could result in better results than accumulating volume. So mechanistically, yes, I think that accumulating volume might make a little bit more sense for gaining muscle. But practically, I think that both approaches can be more or less optimal for the certain individual. And I think that certain individuals might respond better to straight sets and vice versa. And I also think that some people have their life stress is that to a point to where accumulating volume for their entire body just doesn't work out very well. And they need to have a more static approach. And some people like kind of going back and forth between both approaches. And for a few mesocycles, they like to accumulate volume. And then for a couple mesocycles, they just want to try with a more static approach. And they want to see which one works better for them. And that makes a hell of a lot of sense to do as well. Just kind of testing these variables. Now, that's not a very controlled study, so there's a lot of confounding things there. But I think both approaches can work, and depending on the individual, is going to depend on which approach you take. But I'll just kind of end with, mechanistically, the way that I rationalize it with myself, and I have my own biases, and I'm a human like anybody else, and I don't know the answer to everything, but the way I rationalize it in my head, it makes a little bit more sense to accumulate volume from the physiological level for hypertrophy purposes. All right, so that's kind of my thoughts on that, Owen. Next question. Damn, dude. I got a lot of questions left, and not a lot of time. So we're going to rapid fire. Not really, though, because I like answering these in depth because I've been in the position to where I've asked a question before and someone gives like a sentence answer, and I'm just like, man, I really would have appreciated you kind of going into the context behind that and explaining in a little more depth. So I really want to not take for granted the people that took the time to ask me questions, which make sure to ask your questions below. Drop this bad boy a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm sorry, but I really appreciate each and every question I get. I really want to make sure I take the time to really try to help people out that ask me questions. So that's enough on that. Massenot asks, is the stimulus from the first exercise versus the last exercise different when the reps in reserve is the same? So for example, here's the example I'm going to use. You're training in the same workout, same session. Is your first set of chest, is that stimulus for growth different than your set number 7 for your chest in that workout? Is set 1 more of a stimulus than set 7? Let's look at this from 2 different perspectives. One perspective is, yes, set 1's going to provide you more of a stimulus than your 7th set because it's likely that you're going to get diminishing returns for each additional set beyond set 1, to where maybe set 1, you get, let's say that each session has a maximum amount of adaptive volume for a certain muscle group. There's a maximum amount of volume that you're actually going to see growth from, all right? Let's say that each session has that, and let's say that that goes up to 100, all right? 100% would be that maximum amount of volume that you get a benefit from in terms of sets. One way of looking at it is that set 1 is going to get you like 50% there. Set 2, 70%. Set 3, 80%. Set 4, 87%. Set 5, 92%, and so on and so forth. And each set is going to have diminishing returns. I think that makes sense. Another perspective is that each set is going to provide you a similar stress across the entire way until you get to a point to where it's just more than what you can recover from. So set 1, 20%. Set 2 gets you up to 40%. So on, so forth. And then maybe over like 7 sets, it's just junk volume and not productive anymore. Because each set might provide if it's within like a similar reps in reserve, each set might bring a similar level of stress, which may also output a similar level of growth. And making these 2 arguments in my head here, I'm not sure which one it is. I'm not sure which one makes more sense to me. My hunch is that you probably get diminishing returns for each additional set. So the first model is kind of my hunch, to where set 1 probably gets you like, I don't know, 30 to 40% of the way there. And then set 2, maybe not another additional 30 to 40%, but maybe an additional 20, 25%. And you get a little bit less for each additional set. It's probably the route I would go. But, man, if that's the case, then you would expect higher frequency programs to really outpace lower frequency programs. Because then you could just do like 2 sets or 3 sets to get you up to that 85% each session, but do that across 6 sessions. And that's going to allow you a lot more total percent growth, like 85% across 6 sessions would be 18 sets, and that would give you 85% times 6. Who knows that off the top of my head? Not me. Versus just 2 sessions, but 100% doing those 18 sets in 2 sessions. And that would get you 200% instead of 8 times or 6 times 85. And that would make the argument, you get what I'm saying there? That would make the argument that if that first model of diminishing returns for each additional set is right, then a higher frequency program might make more sense. But that's not really what we see. What we see is that if volume's equated in terms of these hard sets per muscle per week, we see a similar amount of growth. And I feel like that might support the notion that each set is probably going to be a similar amount of stress. And that last set might be as good for muscle growth as your first one. So that would make a lot of sense too. And, maybe it's not either model. Maybe it's somewhere more in the middle to where, yes, maybe your first set does give you the most bang for your buck in terms of stimulus, but maybe the returns aren't super diminishing to where we would see the best results from just like one all-out set every day of the week, But there's probably a balance there to where each session once you get to that 95% of the stimulus that you might get for that muscle in that session, it might be good to just spread that volume to another session, and maybe you would benefit from a higher frequent program. So maybe after you do 7 to 10 sets of a single muscle in a single session, you kind of cap it there. And say you're doing a single mesocycle to where you're working up to 25, 30 sets, for your biceps, then you might spread that across at least 3 sessions instead of just 2. Might be a good idea. So that's kind of my thoughts on that matter. I don't have a direct answer for that because I don't think that there is a direct answer for that, but that's kind of where I'm at with that. All right. And the next question comes from Jake, hometown friend. Thoughts on intermittent fasting? So I think that intermittent fasting is probably, and when I'm talking about intermittent fasting, I'm talking about like intermittent fasting on a daily basis to where you don't eat for 16 hours and you eat in like an 8-hour window is kind of what I'm talking about. And I think that that is probably a little, maybe not as optimal for muscle growth, because I would prefer to see 4 meals containing at least 30 grams of a quality protein source spread out across like 3+ hours across the day. So that's, if you did that and you hit, about a gram per pound of protein, then I think that you are going to be pretty well optimized in terms of protein timing across the day. And I think that that would outperform intermittent fasting a bit. I do think, however, that intermittent fasting can be potentially a better approach for some people in terms of adherence if they already don't like eating breakfast or something like that, and they like eating more later in the day, and intermittent fasting is the only diet that they're really going to be able to enjoy and adhere to, then I don't think that it's going to be like detrimental. And I still think that people can get good results with it, for sure. A couple things I would look out for, though, is that intermittent fasting can set some people up for more so a binge mentality a little bit, to where they kind of starve themselves in the morning throughout the day, and then they just set themselves up for this really huge meal, and then they kind of get bloated and uncomfortable, and it just kind of develops, might result in a less favorable relationship with food if they kind of set themselves up for, I'm going to kind of starve myself and then kind of gorge, rather than a more balanced approach. I would say a balanced approach probably makes a little bit more sense for most people. Also, in terms of practicality of being able to do it the rest of your life, like there might be social situations to where you'd like to go grab a breakfast with somebody and stuff like that and eat outside of your fasting window. And I wouldn't want the restraint of intermittent fasting. Now you could say, well, then you just don't intermittent fast that day. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. But I could also see how you would kind of indirectly avoid those situations because you're intermittent fasting. Like, I know when I was a total bro and would want to have protein every 2 hours, I would purposefully avoid situations that would put me in a place to where I wouldn't be able to eat that frequently, you know? And I didn't even know it until looking back at it. So I would try to be aware of that. And in general, I probably don't recommend intermittent fasting a ton. But if someone likes it, they enjoy it, they're still able to hit their daily protein intake, they're still able to get good training performance in and that sort of thing, and you just want pretty good results and that sort of thing, then yeah, I think you can do it. I think a more optimal approach might be to spread your protein across at least 4 meals throughout the day, and they're at least 3+ hours apart. I think you'd probably see better results doing that. So that's kind of my opinion on that, Jake. Next question is from Massanad. Thoughts on targeting specific areas of a muscle? Is it possible? So I kind of answered this a little bit earlier, talking about vertical and horizontal pulling. So I do think that you can perform exercises in a way to target a little bit different portions of a muscle group. Like for your back, it's made up of like your traps go all the way down your back. So I do think that you can target different portions of your traps. I think that you can target your upper traps by doing shrugs and deadlifts and upright rows and stuff like that. And I think that you can target your mid and lower traps by doing like T-bar rows and close grip rows and stuff like that and that sort of thing. So I do think you can kind of target these different portions of a muscle. Can you like target your upper bicep compared to your lower bicep? I'm not super sure. I think that you might be able to stress different portions of the bicep. Is that going to result in different like growth rates of that bicep though? I'm not sure. I'm skeptical of that. For your chest, can you target your upper chest more than like your lower and mid? I think so. I think that if you do a lot of incline work and stuff like that, you probably will stress maybe these upper fibers a little bit more and see a little bit more growth of those upper fibers. I do think so. So I think that you can target a little bit different areas of a muscle and stress them in a way and perform exercises to target different portions of your muscle. And like I said, a good example of this is like your lats. I think that if you're doing like really crunching down on your side and doing those low to high cables, you might target that lower lat just a little bit more than if you're doing straight pull downs and getting a really good stretch on that upper portion of your lat. I do think that you might see a little bit of preferential growth for that upper and lower portions, but I'm not 100% sure, and that's just kind of my thoughts on the matter. So I hope that helps you out there. Next question comes from Owen. Say I do wide grip bench for a couple of mesos. It stalls. I go to close grip for a meso. Can I then switch back after a single meso? So that's basically how frequently to rotate exercises. So short answer, yes. I think that you could definitely go back to wide grip after taking a mesocycle off of them and go right back to them. Totally think that's fine. I would just, with exercise rotation, I would just be a little bit cognizant of making sure that you commit to an exercise for a while and really try to see progress in that rather than switching that out every mesocycle. So if you stick with wide grip for a few mesos, it gets stale, then you switch another exercise in for a meso, and then you go back to wide grip. I would then stay with wide grip for another few mesocycles before like switching things out again. But yeah, I think that you can do that and that's probably fine. In general, I would say that it's probably a good idea to have a handful of exercises, maybe a horizontal pressing. horizontal pulling that you really like, vertical pulling, a squat, a hip hinge, and maybe a lunge as well, that you keep in your program most of the time, like 75+% of your training year. Have those exercises in, keep coming back to them, and keep seeing if you're progressing. So if your wide grip bench is one of those, you can easily follow, okay, for 3 out of every 4 of my mesocycles I have, I'm going to have wide grip bench presses. But for that one mesocycle, we're just going to kind of switch things up a little bit, become stale, but then we're going to kind of come back to wide grip and see how progress is on them, having them somewhere in my program. Then I think that's totally cool and that's totally fine. But I would just make sure to have kind of your bases covered across the different planes of motion, and to have a handful of exercises that you have in there 75-80% of the time to really get good at, really get that neurological proficiency, to really try to overload them and track progress over time on them over the long term. And then I think you're doing pretty good, and you can definitely have those mesocycles to where you just swap something in for a meso and then kind of rotate them back in. All right, so hopefully that answers that there. And now the moment you've all been waiting for. Man, we are 27 minutes deep into this. I hope my camera doesn't die. But, so Gary asked me, are there signs intra-workout carbs can be beneficial besides how you feel with and without calories? Could it contribute to DOMS? All right, that's one question on intra. Next question is, I work out immediately after work, so my pre-workout is eaten 4 hours before. I do make sure to eat a big meal, like 70 grams of protein, 50 carbs, fiber, etc. I have some essential amino acids before hitting the gym. Should I add carbs too? I do have faster digesting carbs post-workout. So both of these kind of touch on this intra-workout, peri-workout question. And a review by Burke, 2011, Carbs for Training and Body Composition. Go check it out on Google Scholar. And also there's a review by the International Society of Sports Nutrition. I think Campbell and Bill Campbell is the author on that. Talks about intra-workout nutrition. But basically a finding from this is that acute carbohydrates may increase your fuel source, spare muscle glycogen, prevent low blood glucose, and influence the central nervous system. Also, amounts of carbohydrates may increase performance. And that is within both a sweet and non-sweet over a placebo. If it's less than 45 minutes, your training session, it's probably not needed. That's kind of the main findings from this. So, back to Gary's question, that tells me that, yes, there seems to be beneficial of intra-workout carbs besides just how you feel. Because it has benefits of these, prevents low blood glucose, spares muscle glycogen, might influence the central nervous system, affect your fuel source. And then the review by Campbell et al. Also suggests it might mitigate muscle damage a little bit because of that insulin response, just a little bit. So that kind of tells me there is more to this than just how you feel. And since the sweet carbohydrate mountains and the non-sweet both did well, it kind of tells me that it's not just like the placebo effect of, oh, I think I'm eating something sweet, so I feel good now, you know? Which there could be some of that too. But that tells me that the carbs specifically are playing a role in some of this stuff. And I do think that it might help mitigate muscle damage, 'cause like I talked about before, about it inducing that insulin response, and insulin can be kind of anti-catabolic and prevent a little bit of muscle damage potentially. And if you mitigate muscle damage a little bit, that might kind of indirectly help with soreness. Now, soreness. Where does soreness come from? Well, it seems to be correlated pretty well with muscle damage, so that's probably one factor in it. So yeah, I think that it could contribute to DOMS there, Gary. But soreness also involves like the pain response, and pain is like a multifactorial neurological event to where it's super complicated to where pain actually comes from. And a lot of it comes from in your head. in your brain. And I'm not saying that pain is like all in your head or anything like that, but your brain has a pretty big role in pain regulation and that sort of thing, and your brain has a pretty big role in everything. So we're not breaking any groundbreaking stuff here, but it's difficult to know where pain actually comes from. And Barbell Medicine has a sweet article on pain. I'll just go to their site and type in pain and see what you can find and read about that if you would like. But yes, I do think that these intra-workout carbs might have that benefit. And now for Madaville's, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. You asked about, you ate 4 hours before training, you went to work, you had a big meal, but now you're hitting the gym, you had some essential amino acids. Should you also have some carbs in that meal? Some acute carbs. I would lean towards yes, because I think that a meal 4 hours prior, your blood glucose levels may have come back down a little bit. You might not get the benefit of sparing a little bit of muscle glycogen. You might benefit from that acute fuel source. You might benefit from some of these intra-workout benefits of carbohydrate as you would like having it right before your workout. So honestly, what I would do in your situation is I would have a shake made up of, since you already have essential amino acids, throw those essential amino acids in there. And then I would put in like 20 plus grams of carbs, and I would drink like a third to a half of that right as I'm starting my workout. And I would probably sip on the rest of it as I'm going. And probably finish it like with a third of my workout left is probably what I would do. And I just think that that will have some of these potential benefits of sparing muscle glycogen, preventing low blood glucose because you haven't eaten in a while now. You are having a pretty big meal, and if you're like in a gaining phase or maintaining, then there's a good chance that this meal isn't fully digested and that you are totally fine. There's a good chance of that. If you're dieting, then I think I would be more strict on having this meal pre-workout with some carbs. But if you're already gaining and you're already feeling good in your training, and it probably doesn't matter as much, but if you were dieting, I would totally recommend that, having some carbs in there. Maintaining or gaining, don't think it matters as much, but I would still try it. I would just try throwing 20 plus grams of carbs in there and see how your performance is and see if that helps you out, all right? So that's just something that I would try. Let me know down below if you have any more questions on that question right there, or if you have any more questions for next week's Q&A. I really appreciate you. Peace out.